The monument in front of the county courthouse downtown in Chattanooga is the focus of a press conference on Tuesday morning, or will be the focus of a press conference on Tuesday morning, where Jim Coppinger, the county mayor, has an announcement to make of some kind when people are, of course, wondering what that announcement might be. So the question is, what is that monument? Who does it show? What is it about? And why is it a flashpoint of controversy? The NAACP chapter in Chattanooga and Hamilton County is opposed to it. Dr. Leonora Woods has complained about it because the man depicted in that statute is a Confederate. He fought for the southern states on the same grounds that were used by the American colonies against the British, and that is to say, independence and self-government. So that was the side on which he fought. General A.P. Stewart is his name. He in 1890 became the commissioner of the Chickamauga and Chattanooga military parks, and he was in his perspective, he was not. I think it's going to be difficult, as we'll hear from John Shearer, the writer. It'll be difficult to pin him or place him in the slaver camp, even though his side, the Confederacy, did fight for the right of self-determination on the slavery question. John Shearer is a freelance journalist. He is a Chattanooga native and has been for 12 years living in Knoxville with his wife, Laura. He has 3 grown stepsons, and he's just back in Chattanooga. He's just been back for about 3 weeks as a writer and journalist. Now, John, just a few days ago, you had a verifying story in Chattanoogan.com describing what you've been able to discover about General Stewart. Give us a sketch, please, of General A.P. Stewart.
Well, David, I didn't know a lot about him until I started researching a little bit. I know he was born up in Rogersville, Tennessee, and attended West Point, and met his wife while he was in Connecticut, and was a secessionist, anti-secessionist, I guess, at the start of the war, but ended up joining, Tennessee in the South, and was with the Army of Tennessee and fought at several battles like Shiloh and Chickamauga. I understand he was injured at Chickamauga. I don't know a lot of details about that. And then I think in Atlanta, when General Leonidas Polk was killed, he became a lieutenant general. And then he had been a college teacher for a while at Cumberland University near Nashville. Then he
was
went
that
back
before the war?
Before the war, I think, and maybe in Nashville. And then he went back to that and after the war and got into the insurance business. And then he became chancellor of the University of Mississippi. And after that, then when the work...
That was at the last 2 or 3 years of his life then in Mississippi.
Right. He was there, a chancellor from 1874 to about 88, I think. And then he became a commissioner of the... as they made plans to develop a park, several years after a lot of people thought they needed to preserve, and help people remember the Civil War battles around Chattanooga and elsewhere. So I think there were like several commissioners. They wanted one who was maybe a Union veteran and one who was a Confederate veteran. So he took on that job as a Confederate veteran and lived in Chattanooga for several years around the 1890s till the early 1900s.
When did he die?
He died in 1908, and I believe he had moved back to Mississippi about 1905. I think by then all the work on the park was completed, or most of it, and he wasn't needed.
When you say he was a Whig, say something about who the Whigs were, because President Lincoln was a Whig before the Republican Party was formed.
Right. I think it was kind of I don't know a lot of political history, but I think it was, the Republicans who were mainly up north, and I think it was the forerunner of the present-day Republican Party, maybe in the north. Of course, in the South, for years and years, they were Democrats, even though they may have been conservative.
Now, the Whig Party, from what I can recall in my reading, John Shearer, you're the Knoxville, Chattanooga writer and journalist, formerly at the Chattanooga Times Free Press. The Whigs were the party of internal improvements, which, again, that position was fought by the South because the internal improvements idea was we used the federal power to improve the states and spend money in the states. So it tended to be a big government party. And it was also the Whig Party was also the part of the tariff. There were tariffs that had been imposed, with a rate as high as almost 50%. That was under the Morrill Act. The Morrill tariff was the one that perhaps sparked the secessionist movement. But the Whig Party was one that favored the North by the tariff, which offended the South and hurt the South badly.
Right, you're probably right.
Those were two main points in the Whig platform.
Good, yeah. you're right. I don't know a lot of details.
So if General Stewart was a Whig, at least earlier on, those would have been things that he was not offended by. The internal improvements idea and the tariff concept, he was not offended by those if that was his party.
Right. And he, spent a lot of time, I think, in Connecticut. That's where he met his wife. And so, he was exposed to different parts of the country for sure.
So he was more cosmopolitan than maybe people in the South.
Go.
Right. And I think Yankee culture, Northern culture is probably on a higher level than in the South.
Uh-huh.
And more academic, more, you might say, more liberal, more Unitarian oriented, and so a tariff that helps the central government is something to be favored, even though it hurts the South badly as it did, and is paid for by the Southerners. So he was an anti-secessionist Whig. What John Scherer, in your looking for old clips about General Stewart, what did you find on the point of his being a secessionist? What could have been, or what were his objections to the ideas of secession?
I never found a lot on that. I know there's been books written, and a lot of people probably in Chattanooga are a lot more knowledgeable about the Civil War than I am. I mainly just looked at I saw the articles about, maybe they talked about when he was older, and he was evidently a real nice person, and real interested in literature, and people would come up and have intellectual conversations with him, and he was evidently a well-liked, after the war by the 1890s, and just probably treated as like a local celebrity, so to speak, just somebody who had been a well-known name in the Civil War.
Now, the statue in front of the county courthouse, John Scherer, weighs about, according to your accounting of it, weighs about a ton. The actual, is it bronze?
Yes, it's bronze.
Statue.
It was made in clay, and then it was set in bronze or cast in bronze up at the Tiffany Studios in New York City. In fact, if you look on the statue or the bust, you can see that on one side, and then you can see the name of the sculptor on the other one, Belle Kinney.
Well, say something about her.
She was from Nashville and had quite an accomplished career. I just recently wrote another story for Chattanooga.com about her. And, she did 2 statues that are in Statuary Hall there in Washington, D.C., which were quite prestigious commissions. One of John Sevier, the Tennessee pioneer, and the other one of Andrew Jackson, I believe. And she was only about in her 20s when she did the one here. She had already become well known, and I guess around Tennessee, and maybe that's how the United Daughters of the Confederacy learned of her and knew of her. And she also did later on sculptures of a couple of the Macaulay School founders, the one of Chief John Ross. It's also on the Hamilton County Courthouse lawn, and one of the early Provident official, R.J. McClellan, and then her husband, she married a man named Leopold Schultz. He was from Austria, and he was also a sculptor. And they worked on some commissions together, I think, up around the war, what do they call it, the War Memorial Building in Nashville. They have 2 or 3 things, and they worked on the Parthenon. And he also did the sculpture there of the mailman that's at the Federal Building downtown. And she had a sister named Marie Renner, who lived in Riverview, and she used to visit her a lot, I believe.
Were the United Daughters of the Confederacy, these of course were Southern women who had a high view of the cause, and of course they realized they had been their side had been defeated, and so what were they about? Did they have some kind of racial animus in their desire to have monuments? What was their purpose in raising these monuments and having events that commemorated great deeds during and after the war?
I think it was probably love of their land as much as anything. Their ancestors had fought for the, Confederacy, and, what they were probably women of their time, who, the culture, the way it was, but, whether they had any deep prejudice, I don't know.
When you say women of their time, you're suggesting that they didn't see anything wrong with viewing black people as sort of second-rate citizens.
Could be. I don't know enough about it. Like I say, they were probably raised in the culture of their time. I don't know. A lot of those women, when the monument was dedicated, may have been born about the time of the Civil War, or right after it. And
so, in other words, your point is that they what it sounds like what you're saying is they didn't act. They didn't hold to their views about the South and General Stewart in a explicitly racial or hateful way, but being members of their race and living in the times in which they did hold to certain sort of invisible prejudices that Franklin Macaulay tells about when he tells about his change of heart about the white man and the black man when he was a student at the university, I think in Nashville.
Right, I guess you're a product of your time, and you maybe don't think about things at the time. Hey, this is wrong, or I shouldn't have this prejudice, or whatever.
Well, just briefly about the monument itself, the physical object, it weighs about a ton, 2,000 pounds. You're indicating, and the plinth, the heavy concrete base upon which it sits, is about another about 4 or 5 tons, and that together that was a combination that was lethal to the initial plans. What were the initial plans, and how did it end up where it is now?
Right, as I understand, she had maybe completed the monument a year or two before it was actually dedicated in 1919, and they realized, I think the architect of the county courthouse and maybe some other people, he was R.H. Hunt, of course, realized that might be too heavy. They were going to put it somewhere in the rotunda area, kind of in the central part of the courthouse, but they realized, the floors weren't built to hold 14,000 pounds. So they decided there at the last minute to find an alternative location, and they found one there on the south side of the courthouse line.
So 14,000 pounds, that's a larger figure than I had in mind. That's
right.
7 tons.
Right. And I found an old article that mentioned that way.
So the monument is in the front. Now, what John Shearer do you make of the controversy about it? To explain to my listener kind of what the two sides are about this monument and others like it.
Well, of course, the people who like the monument or want it kept there, they consider it more a part of history, good or bad. It's just a part of the heritage of the city of Chattanooga. And of course, the others are find it offensive. They consider it, they think back to the Confederacy represents, slavery and prejudice, which of course everybody agrees now was wrong. But so you can, I can kind of see both sides of the issue, and and maybe they can come to some agreement that everybody's happy with.
Well, I wonder what General Stewart, who was a man of conciliatory effort, the idea of having parks that marked a battle where brave men on both sides died, where there was bravery and courage on both sides. No doubt there were acts of cowardice and humiliation on either side. That his work in establishing the park was, let's just grant, was in the direction of conciliation. Why, if that was his work, his life work after the war, why does that not come, I wonder, into the minds of the critics of that statute first, and the side he took, the Confederacy, second?
Right, that's a good point. He's not like some of these other people who, may have owned slaves or whatever. I understand he didn't own slaves, and of course he spent, a part of his time working for the federal government and, serving a university. So he was, his work with the Confederacy, I guess, was just a small part of his body of work. And yes, I'm sure he would. I don't know what he would think about the controversy now. I don't know enough about him. If he was a modest man, he may not wanted a statue. But I'm sure he would like to see people come together in a conciliatory manner. I
was just thinking that he would probably have been one to have said, that I'm really not the one you should make a statue of. You should make a statue of a great general, or maybe a statue representing 4 or 5 common soldiers who were holding their muskets and licking their wounds and looking disheveled and gaunt as many Confederate men did. Something like that would be much more honoring of either the cause or the general concept of bravery, and not me.
Right.
And so I have the feeling, based on what I've read from you, John Stewart, that he might have been someone who said, look, just don't take me down. Don't make a big deal out of it. I have the feeling he probably would have said that, but I don't really know.
Right. And I think he was kind of honored more for his, being in Chattanooga in the later part of his life as much as his Civil War, feats.
Well, I think the interest that people have in defending the statute, though, John Shearer is of General Stewart, is that they object to the cultural Marxism, which says we have to erase all these signs. It is, of course, this monument is not history itself. It is a representation of history. It is an argument about something in the past. And the defenders of statues say, well, it's not itself offensive, because look at this man's very life. He may have been a Confederate, but look, he was an anti-secessionist, as was General Lee. but their loyalties and their connections and their having their roots, if you will, brought them to one side. And it's not ungodly to be on one side or the other, and it doesn't make you a racist or a hater or a bigot to be in the Confederate forces. Just like in the Wehrmacht, the German army in World War II, most of those soldiers were just grunts. They were not Nazis. They served the Nazi Party, which controlled the Wehrmacht, German army, but the German army was not evil in itself. It was sort of controlled by its political superiors, Hitler and his party, the SS and the Gestapo. So they controlled the army, which was in a way innocent and just forced into service of that political, that racist, Jewish, anti-Jewish political ideology. So,
right.
What do you? I'll stop talking. What do you say, John?
Well, I don't get really into the political thing. I try to look at both sides of all issues, but I know it's it is in a very visible location, and kind of that's important for both sides, and also it's considered an important piece of art. Maybe that has to be considered too.
This is David Tulis, and caller, you're live on the air with John Shearer, the journalist. What's on your mind?
Can I? You're making a logical argument that makes sense, but can I throw a monkey wrench in here? This has nothing to do with anything you're talking about. The communist left that has been control of America for over 100 years want to erase anything that has any sense of Americanism. They want to totally erase it, like you hate the federal government and you want to erase them. And the North may not like parts of the South and erase them, instead of sticking to our constitutional republic and respecting our Constitution. You have to first break down a person to rebuild them. You have to break down the system to rebuild it. So it's about whether your argument is logical or not is not relevant. We're at war. The Marxist left, which are almost all Republicans and all Democrats, through their minions, which are these protesters, want to tear down everything our republic stands for. David, when you no longer could take your piece of paper and redeem it for something of value in 1968, you lost your country. You lost your nation. He who controls the money supply controls the nation. They want to tear down religion, tear down this country, new world order, one world government, statue by statue, picture by picture, erase it. Kids have been dumbed down. That's what it's about. You're making a logical argument, but I think your argument is in the wrong direction. Let's look at the individuals trying to destroy everything that is America for over 200 years. Thanks.
Right, and Mike, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm being very moderate and modest in what I'm suggesting here, and in my questions with John. And I think you're right. There is a culture war, and it is effectively against several concepts. It's against Christian government, Christianity. It's against decentralization. It's against local limited government. It's against constitutional limits on the state. Those are all things which are warred against by Republican and Democrat, by the cultural Marxists. So, but on the other hand, I would say that John Shearer is providing a valuable service in telling us about the monument itself. So, John, what else would you want to tell my listener about the controversy aside, about maybe the man, General Stewart? What other important thing do we need to know about him?
Just that he was, I think, very well thought of. Like I said, his wife had died in Chattanooga too. She was at somebody's house and was in ill health about 1898, and so they did really, have established roots here. And he lived at some man's house named Moses Cliff for part of his time here. And by all I've been able to read, he certainly seems like an admirable person, fine man, and
seemingly undeserving of the occasional expressions of hatred we have against him and the kind of the things he represented.
Right. Probably he himself was not a controversial figure, other than serving the Confederacy, I guess.
Well, John Shearer, you mentioned you have a second piece out about this monument at Chattanooga.com. Has it already appeared? Have I missed it?
I did a second one that was posted yesterday about Belle Kinney Schultz and her life, and I just got real interested. Sometimes when I do historical stories, one story leads to another, so I saw she was the sculptor of it, and I had never heard her name before and just got interested in reading more about her.
Well, make sure you, my listener, go to Chattanooga.com and look for John Shearer's works. There are two essays there, one that came out about a week ago, The headline is General A.P. Stewart's bust has been on courthouse lawn nearly a century. And then one freshly posted yesterday by John Wilson at Chattanooga.com. Make sure you go there and read the story about the sculptress Belle Kinney Schultz, who had a studio in New York and made this monument of General Stewart. John Shearer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here, Dave.
John Shearer is a longtime journalist and formerly at the Chattanooga Times-Press, and has worked in other publications as well, the Knoxville News Sentinel, and is a freelance writer and journalist, and has always had an eye on historical detail and historical people, and is at it again back in Chattanooga, 3 weeks now, back in Chattanooga with his wife, Laura. This is David Tulis. Thanks for giving us a couple minutes of your time. Now I've got some messages. Hang on.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.